Hello, Star Wars fans. It's 332 days until Christmas 2020, and I thought I would have a live stream here today just to talk about Star Wars, some things that are on my mind, some things that are current, and I have an open invitation to folks to join me here on the live stream within the Discord groups that I belong to. So if you happen to be catching this live and you'd like to join us on the live stream, shoot me a private message on one of the Discord servers. It's, 332 days until Christmas. I need 2020. Quiet that. So hit me up with a direct message, and I'd be happy to bring you in, and we can talk together. So without further ado, we do have somebody joining us here soon. As soon as they get connected to the meeting space with the audio, we'll loop them in. I just wanted to kind of introduce some topics that I wanted to discuss today. First was animated series. We've kind of wrapped up on the Resistance series. The series ended this past weekend, and I've watched both of those seasons all the way through. Have some thoughts on that, and I thought I would label the animated discussion as the good, bad, and the ugly. I've been around Star Wars for a long time, and there's certainly some animated series that are better than others. And as we get ready to go into the Clone Wars Season 7, thought it'd be a good time to just touch base on that. The other is, why do fandoms, and not just Star Wars specifically, but why do some fandoms get labeled as toxic? Over this last weekend, I went and visited a comic book store with my daughter, and I overheard some of the employees there talking about how Star Wars fans are really toxic and how they've caused so much grief for George Lucas. And those are familiar subjects if you've been around. The other that happened over the weekend is I was at church on Sunday and talking to a young man still in high school, and he's a huge Harry Potter fan. He likes to kind of cosplay with Newt Scamander, and he's got a full outfit there, and he hand makes some wands and things. He's a big fan of Harry Potter, but he tried to join some fandom discussions and decided that that's not for him because those fandoms are just so toxic. So I thought I'd talk about, why do we think that fandoms get labeled as toxic, and what differentiates them from somebody who just really wants to be a fan and talk to other fans versus some of the negative sides of the fandom where they're kind of picking apart the series, and the pros and cons of those. So those are the first things I thought we would start the discussion with. There are certainly other topics going on in Star Wars right now that we could cover, and we'll go those as they come. So as we get started, we do have a guest here with us. Jaron, would you like to introduce yourself? Just let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Jaron. I've been a Star Wars fan for quite a long time. Live up in New Hampshire. Well, take that back, just moved to Maine. Just across the border now. That's going to take some getting used to. Yeah, I've been a fan of a lot of the various Star Wars podcasts and YouTube stations and stuff and channels for a while, and just kind of been popping around and happened to see your call for a request to speak on Discord, so I thought I'd jump in.
Great. That's great. I tend to be a kind of a pragmatist. I have joined with the cause of the Gray Order. Try to be honest and level-headed in thinking. There's certain things about Star Wars, the movies, the shows, content that I enjoy, some that I enjoy less. And I don't mind having a bit of a balanced discussion there, if you will. I don't mind being critical when I need to be critical, but overall, I want to be a fan. So that's where I come from as well. And so feel free to join in. Let's first talk just a little bit about animated series. So as I just mentioned, Resistance just came to an end. That first season of Resistance seemed a bit clunky. For me personally, the humor in it seemed kind of over the top, aimed at younger kids, and that's fine for animated series. But I think there's an outlet for that. If you've caught any of the Star Wars Lego series, for example, Star Wars Lego's hilarious. There's a lot of humor in that, childish humor in it, and it seems to come across very, very well. Those characters could be silly, they can be blown apart, put back together, all of that. And they're fun, I think, for kids to watch, even for adults to watch. Those are fun to watch. But when you have other series that are tied into canon, and they're meant to build upon canon, build upon the lore, then when it gets too far over into the silliness, and this was my complaint about like Jar Jar Binks and some of the things from the prequels, when it gets too far over that edge, then for me, it's not as enjoyable.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that you have to have that that happy medium to where it covers a wide swath of the community. And I mean, I guess there's a certain amount that where you have something like Resistance where it's on Disney XD, so it's gonna tend to slide more towards the younger the younger folks for the most part. But I mean, obviously, a lot of us are still watching it. So
Yeah, exactly. And I've been rewatching the Clone Wars as we're getting ready for season 7, and I'm in the middle of season 3 right now, watching it in a chronological order. And some of the shows there, um, there was one scene specifically where you can see dead people floating in space among other debris, right? That's kind of heavy for the kind of silliness compared to what you see in Resistance. I mean, Resistance certainly showed people dying. They showed people, they showed battles where people were blown up or whatever the case might be. You saw plenty of dead people, but it didn't come across the same way as like a dead guy floating in space among other debris, right? And especially the lead character Kaz, he got a nickname Spaz, right? Because he's just, for me, not a great character. And yeah, and this is what I mean about being balanced. Like, I love Star Wars, and I watched Resistance, not hating it, but thinking, wow, I think this could have been better had they shored up that character, especially when you've got another character like Nico right there with him who can get by with being silly. His race doesn't understand nuances, and some of that comes off very, very childish, very silly. And you've got a perfect outlet for that when you've got another guy who's supposed to be a Resistance pilot. He's trained. He's supposed to be a spy, but he comes off ridiculous.
yeah, I guess I try to remember though when it comes to comparing it to something like Clone Wars. Clone Wars was originally on Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
So there's that's going to tend to to slope towards towards more young adult or adult audience rather than like 11 or 12 like you might find with Disney XD. So
Right.
So I try to keep that in mind too that there's gonna be a amount of difference there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't do so much, but I agree that there totally is drastically different. I would have liked to have seen some of the Resistance stuff, being a little more, have a little more depth.
Yeah. And it would flirt with that from time to time. There'd be really good episodes in there that would build upon the lore. Like they tied into the sequel trilogy really well. We saw like the planet where you get the flashes of Luke, the rain, and all of that coming down, and Rey sees herself, and she sees the what is it? The Knights of Ren. she sees the Knights of Ren there with Kylo, and they're approaching. You see that planet in Resistance in season 1, and you get a little bit of backstory, and you got those 2 kids that are Force sensitive that take board the Colossus. We don't see them much in season 2 at all. They don't build upon those characters. Presumably, those kids are still there. I never saw them leave. But that planet that was in the Force Awakens appears in the series. So you get that. You get some more stuff as far as there were episodes that involved Phasma. We had Kylo Ren. You had General Hux, different members of the First Order, and some interaction going on with the main characters. So it did flirt with that from time to time, and it would kind of build upon the lore. But for the most part, they were on their own journey, and it kind of took a different route, more of a Battlestar Galactica kind of theme, where they're constantly running and hiding and trying to get supplies. I've heard Star Wars Explained, for example. He caught onto that theme and pointed it out several times. And where I felt like the series as a whole, when it came to a close, it didn't try to tie back to that one last time. And I think that's where I felt a little short. I felt that, you see, Alex with Star Wars Explained also complained about it. People that also hated the series as a whole, like Thor Skywalker, he pointed out, like, wow, there's a lot of things that could have been brought in that just were left off the table. And this season being shortened, there weren't as many episodes. It seems like they could have extended, another episode or 2, even 1, where they reply to the call and they show up there for the main battle. Something would have been nice, but it just ends. I think it tied up its own series well enough. But as far as those opportunities to tie into a bigger lore, something that's supposed to be part of canon, was opportunity missed.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that having that extra time would have been beneficial to the story and and how it integrates within the rest of the Star Wars lore. So I agree.
Yeah. So as far as my overall impression of Resistance, opportunities missed, I would say it's not my favorite in the animated series by far. I think both the Clone Wars and Rebels surpass it in both story and lore. That it builds on the franchise better. Resistance falls beneath those 2 for sure. And then if you go back to, like, when I was a kid, you go back to the old Droid animated series or the Ewok animated series, these Resistance was far better than those. So I'm thankful that we have things being created, as you mentioned, like on Disney XD for kids. It's definitely a kids channel, right? Disney XD is not like it's specifically aimed at a younger audience. To have an animated series that was on a channel for a younger audience, it's better than the old Droids and Ewok stuff for sure. And,
Sure.
And thankful for that. So I'll take it for what it is. I've also got Disney Plus, and I've watched a lot of the Lego Star Wars things. I got caught up on them. I haven't followed a lot of those animated shows. I'm older. My kids are grown. And I didn't watch the Lego Star Wars with them as they were growing up. But Disney Plus has a lot of them. I got caught up. They're great. Have you caught up with any of those?
No, I haven't actually. I haven't the Lego stuff. I haven't had a chance to really catch up on. But I do have Disney Plus, so that's certainly something that I plan on sitting down with my son, who's 4.
Nice.
So if you're bopping around, that's him. So
that's great. That's great. I've got an 18 and 28-year-old. One in college, and one is a high school, a public school teacher. So that's my. So from an animated series perspective, um, Resistance is okay. I wish it would have been a little better, but I give it a pass. Um,
I'm on the phone right now, okay? I'm on the phone.
the other topic I wanted to kind of throw out there was about why fandoms get labeled as toxic. And then anything you'd like to discuss, throw out there as well. But so over the weekend, I mentioned in the intro, I was at a comic book store with my 18-year-old, and she was looking for different comics that she'd get caught up with. And so we're going through this store, and as we come in, the people behind the desk are just talking about how horrible Star Wars fans are, how they made life terrible for George Lucas, and he's got stories of just when they were being ridiculous. There's certainly people who are critical, but then people who are like death threats, like you ruined Star Wars to George Lucas back during the prequel time. I certainly remember those kind of things. Social media not being what it is today, we didn't have the kind of exposure, but I was well aware that some people were making George Lucas's life terrible. He complained about it. He wanted, for example, he wanted Jar Jar Binks to be featured far more. And based on the backlash after the Phantom Menace, Jar Jar's role decreased. And Jar Jar is one of George Lucas's favorite characters. So, and the Phantom Menace is, George has said repeatedly, it's his favorite movie that he made. I was like, wow, okay. Not my favorite for sure, but I am aware of that toxicity that's out there. And I know that people complain because you don't have to be a shill, right? There's the other side of it that said, like, everything Star Wars you just love. I've mentioned there are things that I'm not as fond of, but those who are toxic are the ones that want to force their views on others, right? This is just my own opinion. Like, if I don't like something, I have to make sure you don't like it too. And not only that, but we spread the word so that everybody doesn't like it. And we try to tear down rather than build up. So there are people out there who are very negative in the Star Wars space. I've mentioned Thor Skywalker before. Thor is very, very critical of the newer Star Wars stuff. For a long time, I was a patron supporter of his, followed on his Discord group, and was trying to really understand that negativity from a deeper perspective, because I didn't share those views. But Thor comes at it from his perspective of trying to build up. For me, he's too negative. I eventually just said, okay, I can't take any more. But I do know that other people enjoy his content a lot. He speaks opinions that are shared by many. But then you get other people that just are so negative, and they're convinced that you have to agree with them by saying absolutes, like an absolute. Rey is a horribly written character, right? That's an absolute. Versus, I don't like Rey's character because, right? For me, I love Rey's character because, right? I don't have to convince you that you need to love her, but I connect with her in a very positive way. People who don't, people who think that her character kind of goes against their understanding of Star Wars, their connection to Star Wars. Her character prohibits them from connecting to the movie because the way that the character is written. I can understand that as well. I can accept that, like, okay, you don't like a particular character because, or I didn't like Jar Jar because, and I see Dale Erdman on. Hi, Dale. If you do like Jar Jar, and I've heard people that do, my own 18-year-old says, I love Jar Jar. I don't understand why people don't like her. Well, she's 18.
It's an interesting generational difference. A lot of people that grew up with, with the prequels rather than the original trilogies, I've heard that from a few different people that are of that generation. Were like, oh, that's a character that you have some fond memories of. Interesting, because boy, that is not my experience. That's cool that you don't have that animosity or or any of that sort of like negative feelings about. But hey, that's great for you.
Yeah, I still don't get it, and I've got an 18-year-old who loves it. I'm like, well, she says, I think you guys are just too old. You don't get it. Which is an easy excuse for a kid. Just say, well, you're an old person, and your opinion is tainted because you're old and you don't get it. Okay, but I wasn't old when I didn't like him originally, right? Like I was in the U.S. Army. I was when the Phantom Menace was released. So I was an adult serving in the armed forces, and I went and watched Phantom Menace, and I was like, "Ooh, that guy's a little don't care for it." The rest of the story, of course, Darth Maul was great. I enjoyed Qui-Gon and certainly Obi-Wan. I liked the story as a whole,
Sure.
but I just didn't like Jar Jar at all. And even little Anakin, right? I thought, okay, he's a little cheesy, but he's a young kid. Meh, that's all right. Yeah, I didn't get really angry at Jake Lloyd, right? I was like, he played that well enough for a kid.
Since he's able to. I mean, at that age, my God.
Yeah, that plus George Lucas isn't known for being the best director in the world.
Right, or writing the best dialogue.
Right, and so you can't expect a kid to make something out of George's text that, so I was like, okay, well, I gave him a pass. Jake Lloyd was well enough. The story as a whole, okay. Did not like Jar Jar at all, right? None of it. And I was 20 something, right? So I wasn't like this old man at the time. It's just that I had known Star Wars since I was like 9 years old. I was born in 1967. And, when the first movie came out, I was 10 years old. Saw that movie in the theater. It's the first one I remember seeing in the theater. And for a long time, I didn't have any other Star Wars content. It's not like George Lucas was releasing a lot of good stuff. We had the holiday special. That's a winner, we had Ewoks and the Droids that were animated series. Not exactly award winners there either. So for a long time, I didn't have anything else. And so we built off of novels, the extended universe. I read the original Timothy Zahn trilogy, right? That Zahn trilogy for me was where the movies went for like 20 years, like a better part, more than a decade for sure. So I was young enough, I think, to appreciate Jar Jar. I just didn't like him. And as you mentioned, the generational divide, the kids that their first experience with Star Wars was the Phantom Menace don't have that same sort of visceral reaction that those of us grew up with the original trilogy, I think, still carry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the other part is the kid I met Sunday at church who is a huge Harry Potter fan, and he tried to join a Harry Potter fandom and said those people are toxic. And it's just because I think the complaints go into that range that I mentioned before. I don't like it, and you have to not like it. I can't let you enjoy what you enjoy without trying to force you to think what I think. And so he pulled back, right? He said, I don't want any part of that fandom. I'll just be a fan.
Sure.
And I think when people hear and it doesn't make it right, when they hear like Ryan Johnson say that they're toxic, man babies that la la la, right? They say, well, he's calling the fans names. Well, yeah, some fans. But to be fair, I think some fans earn it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's important to remember too. That there's, for me anyway, I look for, to a certain degree, people that I agree with, but at the same time, people that I can relate to enough that I can hear their opinion. And I'm not, I don't get offended by people's opinions that I don't agree with. They're entitled to those opinions.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to gravitate towards people that are more open-minded and less likely to shut people down that don't agree with them.
Yeah.
For me, that's a big part of why I became interested in the Gray Order as well, and kind of going, okay, it's important to be open all sorts of ideas and to not just shove ideas in little boxes and you belong over on that side and you belong over on that side.
That's right. That's a very good distinction, because right now it's easy. And this morning it's kind of funny because I listened to Josh's live stream this morning, and they were kind of picking on some of the Raylos, and I put the Raylos in this, use them as an example because it's kind of current. There are a group of Raylos that are literature fans. They are well versed in literature. They understand literary themes and context. And through the movies, they've made connections to characters, to literary characters, and following those through. And the biggest is Pride and Prejudice. They see a lot of the themes that are in Pride and Prejudice carried out through Rey and Kylo Ren. And so the Raylo connection came through that Pride and Prejudice literary kind of thematic things that they were seeing. That, I think, is fantastic. Great. I mean, that you're that smart, that you've read so much and you're so deep into literature that you can see these themes and connect these characters in that way. I have no problem with that. But I've also seen where some Raylos are threatening Adam Driver's wife because they want him to divorce her and marry Rey. It's like, you guys are crazy, right? Like, there's no way that Adam Driver is going to divorce his wife and leave his kids, right? Like, to go fulfill some fantasy that you've come up with based on this shipping, right? So just as like Ryan Johnson called some of the fans man babies, I think some of them earned it. Some Raylos are getting labeled as fanatic kooks because there are some fanatic kooks. And so you're kind of guilty by association. There are certainly some alt-right kind of people attaching themselves to certain movements within the fandom. There are certainly some of these crazy Raylos attaching themselves to a part of the fandom. But that doesn't make everybody who is a Raylo a bad person, or everybody who dislikes Rey's character, for example, is a bad person. There's that nuance. And I think when fans try to join a fandom and they see this craziness going on, they check out. Right? I can't.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I once again, I think it's important to be able to be open to other people's opinions and not dismiss them out of hand just because they don't agree with you.
That's right.
I personally, I don't much care whether or not Rey and Kylo Ren had any sort of a romantic thing at all. I almost felt like it was kind of shoehorned in at the end of episode 9. Was it necessary? No, but did it make some people happy? Cool. Once again, thematically, I don't think it made a damn bit of difference. So,
yeah, I'm with you 100%. Right? Like, I wasn't a Raylo shipper, right? Ever. I saw some sort of connection emotionally between Finn and Rey. He was certainly cared about her more than anybody else, and so if you want to ship them, okay. But this Raylo thing, I have no skin in that game, right? That's not for me. I'm not a shipper kind of guy. So live and let live. If you're in it because of the literary themes, you could pick up on these and explain them, and that helps your depth of enjoyment for a franchise. That's fantastic. And I don't mind sharing, like hearing where that comes from. Maybe I connect to it, maybe I don't, but that's cool. But when you've gone off the rails, I'll say the same thing for the fandom menace. Right? There's a lot of people who want to lash out at the fandom menace for being toxic. I think they're the same. Like some of them are just people who are reasonable. I don't like this because, and they want to express those thoughts. And so they've connected to other people who are expressing those thoughts. But there are people on the fringe who go too far. And then there aren't people to push back and say, wait, dude, calm down a little bit. Live and let live, right? If you like it, then you can like it. If you dislike it, there's no reason for you to attack those who do. And vice versa, right? What I've seen, because I do like The Last Jedi. I do like Rey. I have seen people who will name call people who call Rey a Mary Sue. I say, well, you're a sexist bigot, right? Well, wait a second. That's not necessarily the case either. Maybe there are some sexist bigots who say that, certainly. But that doesn't mean that just because you say you don't like her because you think she's a Mary Sue, your interpretation, the way that her character comes off the screen to you is offensive in some ways or not well supported. Well, that's fine. But doesn't make you a sexist bigot. And I think when you start name calling other people, whether it be crazy Raylo or some crazy fandom menace or some whatever, that doesn't help when other people are looking at your fandom and saying you guys are crazy. Yeah. So that's just where I come from. That's why I kind of gravitated as well to the Den of Nerds. I enjoy Josh's content quite a bit. He comes at it from a reasoned way. He's not afraid to put out there, hey, this is over the edge. I don't care for it. Or I really did like this, but that doesn't mean you have to. That's good. So those are the primary topics that I was coming to the board with today. Anything on your mind?
Boy, I feel like we kind of touched on a lot of the things I would have thought to want to touch on. So I'm glad that we're kind of on the same wavelength that way.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the new Clone Wars trailer that came out?
Oh, so wonderful. Great question. That trailer is phenomenal, right? I am a huge fan of the Clone Wars series. For me, the Clone Wars series helped me reconcile the prequels. I'm not a huge prequel fan. But the Clone Wars animated series helped develop Anakin's arc. Let me understand a little bit more who some of the ancillary, like Count Dooku, who is he all of a sudden, right? So now I get a better idea who he is. General Grievous, I had no idea who he was, but here he shows up and, he's got all these lightsabers and Obi-Wan fights him. So, but why, right? The Clone Wars animated series helped fill that out, made it feel less jarring to me in many ways with the Anakin story arc specifically. You can see him in these themes that kind of roll through. Plus, it built a character that I adore. I absolutely adore Ahsoka. She's one of my favorites in the whole franchise. And that built it. And of course, that was carried on into Rebels. So I'm extremely excited for Season 7. Extremely, extremely excited. And the rumors for the Rebels season has me intrigued as well. What do you think?
I'm going to be very curious to see, because obviously we know, what happens after the Clone Wars. So, we don't necessarily have the same sort of suspense of like, oh no, Ahsoka and Darth Maul are going against each other. is one of them going to kill the other one? Like, well, obviously not, because they're both around in Rebels, so that's not the thing.
Right.
But spoiler alert.
Right.
but you know, but regardless, it's like, okay, but how do we get to that point? You know?
Right.
You know, so that's what I find interesting is to see how those things connect.
Yeah.
You know, especially to see. I'm especially curious about Darth Maul's kind of arc in this last season, because I felt like they kind of left it at, you know, Sidious has overwhelmed him, and boom, that, you know, that's kind of it, and he goes into hiding somewhere. And clearly, there's more to it than just he runs away and you know, loses himself in a Sith temple somewhere. So so I'll be curious to see the rest of that arc, and especially to see more of Mandalore and more of that, especially after the Mandalorian, because there's clearly some discrepancies between, you know, the Mandalore that we knew from Rebels and you know, the particular sect of Mandalorians that we see in the Mandalorian. So
Right.
definitely going to be curious to see how that shifts and adjusts. And then they talk about the Siege of Mandalore, and it sounds like maybe there are multiple sieges. So so the siege they talk about in the Mandalorian might not be the one that they're talking about in you know, in the Clone Wars. So which is surprising to me, because I would have thought, well, if we see the B2 battle droids, it probably would be Clone Wars era. So I would have thought that would have been the same, but now maybe not. Not really sure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And with the rumors of the Rebels series continuing, put that together with Resistance kind of coming to an abrupt end. I know Lucasfilm said, hey, we only planned on 2 seasons. Everything's ending just like we wanted it to. Like, well, maybe, you know, if I'm going to believe you, suspend my disbelief enough to just say, sure. Looking at continuation of the Clone Wars and continuation of Rebels would explain why those resources didn't want to continue another series that wasn't as followed, right? So they may not want to admit that Resistance didn't have the following they wanted it to, but I think when you say we'd rather put our resources on these 2 things, it implies, you know, I'll let you spin it however you want, Disney, right? Go ahead. But I think we can all see that there's a bigger return from a fandom and from like Disney Plus subscriptions to invest in the Clone Wars and Rebels. So, yeah. I will be curious to see what this rumored 3rd series might be about. I have no idea.
yeah, I don't either.
Yeah. I've heard some rumors, but none of them have hold any water. So
I'll be curious to see how they make adjustments with regards to Disney Plus and with regards to getting content onto Disney Plus a bit faster, because you know obviously we've heard the stories of, you know, people getting through the Mandalorian and then going, okay, I'm all set with my subscription for now until something else comes back out that's more interesting. But
yeah.
Myself, I bought into that 3 years of Disney Plus for like $4 a month or something. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be curious to see how they kind of make those adjustments, because I've already heard on the Marvel side they're, you know, shifting things earlier to Disney Plus so that there's less of a gap that way. So I'll be curious to see if they do that with Star Wars as well.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious about all these rumors with the Obi-Wan live action. There's certainly something going on. Again, if I'm going to believe, I try to be pragmatic and say, okay, I'll give you some benefit of doubt. I may not buy everything you're saying hook, line, and sinker, but there's probably some truth to what you're saying. probably, where the production delays have they've changed the timeline for the production schedule. Now, maybe it's going to still release at the same date. Maybe it'll get pushed. Maybe the series is going to change. Like, who knows what's going on beyond, besides what we're hearing from McGregor saying, "Oh, it's fine, no worries." Like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I'll be curious to see if they, because I could see them going, okay, you know what, we're gonna shift this over to a movie production rather than a series production. But seeing how good The Mandalorian was, I'm almost disappointed by that idea, because you get 2.5 hours rather than 12 to 16 hours of material. I mean, there's just that you can look at so much more. Going to a series that has proper production done.
Yeah, I agree. Solo is sort of where my head goes on it, right? So Obi-Wan, does it go down the path of Solo, or would I have rather seen Solo go down the path of The Mandalorian, right? Like, for me, The Mandalorian was so good, even though the episodes were shorter than we wanted, whatever. The combined content of that Mandalorian series is longer than you would have in either a movie, right? So I'm all for make Solo 2 happen, but maybe as a series on Disney Plus. I'm all for Obi-Wan as a Disney Plus live action, because like you, I would rather see it given more time to develop out. And if we learned anything from the Rise of Skywalker complaints, it's when you try to push too much in too short. I like the Rise of Skywalker well enough. I'd say it's my least favorite of the trilogy, just for me personally. But it's still good, right? I liked it a lot. But what if that had been given more time to breathe? I think more people would have less complaints. And that's...
I for myself, I like it better than Last Jedi, but I think that's mostly just because of Ian McDiarmid. Him coming back and his performance just, to me anyway, elevated that movie.
Yeah.
In a way that that it definitely would have been subpar had he not been in.
Well, my 18-year-old says, my 18-year-old said The Rise of Skywalker is her favorite Star Wars movie of all. Oh, okay. I mean, sure. Not mine. It's not my favorite. But yeah, there's certainly different things. I can certainly understand why The Rise of Skywalker might be somebody's favorite of the sequels. It's a good movie, I think. Could be better again, but I think it's good enough. I mean, to me, it felt good, and it feels good to have that trilogy concluded. So maybe the fandom can move on and we can get past some of this toxicity that people are seeing. So, what else? I think we've covered. There was another rumor, and Josh touched base on it this morning about George Lucas wanting to come back if he could have complete control. I don't buy that a bit, in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. It's unsubstantiated. The rumor comes from a disreputable source, and just hearing over the years Lucas's complaint about the backlash, fan backlash, I don't think he wants any part of it. It's fine for people to think now, like in nostalgic terms, like, oh, we would love to have George back. But the reality is he's not that great of a director. And his, like you mentioned before, some of his dialogue is cringy, right? It's just bad.
Well, and that's why the prequels were, in my opinion, were as bad as they were, is because he didn't have anyone there to kind of give him some pushback,
Right.
To say, can we maybe, touch up some of those lines? Can we maybe, look at giving Jar Jar maybe a slightly different, backstory, or because I personally I found and this is going to be a bit you know it can be kind of dividing in some ways, but I kind of like the idea. I remember someone had come up with an idea of Jar Jar being a Sith.
Oh yeah.
And, hey, you know what? That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure I buy it, but it's a cool idea to give him this kind of backstory of no, in the background he was actually doing a lot of stuff you didn't realize.
Yeah.
And maybe that was, is it possible that's where Count Dooku came from as a substitute for? That's an interesting idea. That he was actually, an apprentice at one point. Like, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, or maybe just even an operative. Maybe he's not a right. We see in Rise there's thousands of Sith worshippers, followers, right? Maybe he's just an operative. Who knows? But yeah, there's things like that, and continuity arc, like Obi-Wan in the original trilogy saying Yoda was his master, and then Obi-Wan is with Qui-Gon, and you're like, well, why? Like, you just made things worse, right? And so, yeah, given George complete...
point of view.
People love to say that, right? Yeah, he wasn't lying from a certain point of view. So that has become a meme, or one of those things that's used in Star Wars fandom, because that's how you explain so many things that aren't solid, right? Well, had he just been given, so again, if he's given complete creative control, I don't think that anybody would, well, I think the pushback, people would remember why they didn't like a lot of his stuff.
Absolutely.
So Dale's given us some feedback here online. Let me just read so you can hear what he's saying. There's a reason for the cringy dialogue. At least in my opinion, it was to show that the relationship between Anakin and Padme was immature. I think that's fair. Especially with the age difference, right? People love that stuff when a 5-year-old says it. Yeah. And then Dale's second, I love Jar Jar's a Sith and lots of other aspects that could have been. That's exactly right. The prequels are just as guilty as the sequels in what could have been. I think there's a valid statement to say that the prequels had a better through arc than the sequels did. The prequels are more tied together, but I agree there's a lot of that could have been. I agree with you on the Sith Jar Jar. There's other things that, like, had Anakin been a 13-year-old instead of an 8-year-old, big difference. And it would have been better going into the second movie with him all of a sudden with this love interest. A 13-year-old to maybe a 17-year-old versus an 8-year-old to a 17-year-old. You're like, ooh, yikes. Yeah, I love you 3000. Yeah. So that's that, Dale. Thanks for the input. That's so we've been going about 48 minutes. I've covered the things I wanted to discuss. Jaron, anything else, or Dale? Give us anything else you'd like to discuss.
I think we've covered everything I had thoughts on.
Yeah, me too. And I don't want to drag it out to drag it out. So if you're watching on the replay, it's great. Dale's typing something. Look for us on Discord. If you haven't joined Discord, there's a great Discord discussion group with the Den of Nerds, with the Gray Order. Both of us kind of adhere to some of those. And then there are other great Discord groups out there involved in the Star Wars community. If you're looking for a Star Wars community to involve in, we know some the fandoms can come across toxic, as some of the folks that I've encountered find. But there are good ones out there as well. And I think The Great Order is a great example where we could have open dialogue and disagree on which is our favorite movie and who's our favorite character without tearing somebody down for the same. So Dale says 2 things to remember. One is the rule of 80-20 and the fact that that it's their story to tell. Yeah, it was George Lucas's story to tell. I come at movies that way. Like, maybe I wanted to see well, in fact, there are things that I wanted to see different in The Rise of Skywalker. But you know what? It wasn't my story to tell.
Right.
So there are things that I would have liked to seen done differently. I would have liked to seen Anakin as a Force ghost, for sure. I would have loved to have more of that interaction. I wanted to see Luke in more like that Force projection where he was physically interacting with things. I wanted to see him interact with Kylo directly. That didn't happen. So there's things that I wanted to see but didn't. And you have to remember, it's their story to tell. So Dale, that's absolutely valid. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's about the only thing out of Rise that I wish we could have gotten was having a visual representation of all the Jedis that spoke to Rey rather than just audio. But I question how much of that would have been perhaps maybe more difficult because of their because of the voice actors. Because we had a lot of characters from the animated series that were a part of that discussion.
Yeah.
So maybe that was something that they were looking at, going, okay, well, maybe we want the voice of Ahsoka, from the series, but maybe she's not the right actress to play her in person because maybe we'll want to do a whole series or a whole live action movie with her, or
Yeah, you don't want to have to do what they did originally with Darth Vader, right? When Anakin's Force Ghost was there, the Anakin I remember was this old, heavier set guy.
Me too.
And then after the prequels came out, all of a sudden there's a re-release and it's Hayden Christensen. And I'm like, wait a second, well that wasn't the Anakin that I saw. So yeah, they could set themselves up in that same scenario, right? Or maybe they cast an Ahsoka, and then 10 years from now, there's a live action, different actress, and now you've got this problem. You've got to reconcile. Yeah.
Same thing with Palpatine, going from A New Hope to any of the rest of the trilogy, the original trilogy, where Ian McDermott wasn't the visual representation in The New Hope, so he had to kind of retcon that a bit and kind of swap that out a bit.
Yeah, I'm replying to Dale, and just get it in here. So Dale it was talking about there were a lot of things that would have been better if they stuck their story in the sequels. Let the haters hate because they're going to hate anyway. True.
Find something to hate, and they'll find something regardless. So.
That's right, and I think Dale put it. Remember, it's their story to tell. That is critical. I heard people talking about, well, the Resistance animated show would have been better if Cass was a Force sensitive and right? And he became a Jedi. And, well, now you're telling your own story.
Right.
It's not your story to tell; it's their story to tell. And that's not the story.
You're saying you wish Kaz was Ezra. Okay.
Right. I get it. But yeah. So I think I'll wrap it up here for the day. Again, if you're looking for a great Discord group, hit us up. We'll get you information on that. If you haven't liked and subscribed to my channel, I'd ask kindly would do so. That would be great for me. And until next time, say Merry Christmas to you all, and may the Force be with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Daddy.